Why did the entire courtyard go silent the moment she stepped forward? That was the question echoing through the minds of nearly 300 Navy SEALs as Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid stood in the center of the sand-floored training pit, the morning fog lifting around her like curtains, revealing a stage she never asked for. It wasn't her height, or her gender, or even the silver-green eyes that looked too calm for someone surrounded by almost 300 men trained to dismantle nations. It was the way she stood, composed still, waiting, as if something was coming, and she already knew how it would end. Master Chief Jake Brennan towered over her by nearly a foot, his shoulders wide as bulkheads, his presence heavy with 2 decades of dominance inside naval special warfare. He could end conversations, careers, and confidence with a single look. Men bigger than her shrank under the weight of his stare. Men tougher than her backed down when he stepped forward. But she didn't move. And that, more than anything, made every SEAL watching feel like they'd missed something important. Brennan circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey he could already taste. The courtyard's distant clang of weights, the rhythmic shouting from PT groups, even the wind over the Pacific seemed to quiet as he stalked around her. "Lieutenant," he said, loud enough for instructors and students crowding the perimeter to hear, "you think what you did this morning was impressive?" Sarah didn't answer, not because she was afraid to, because she knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't reprimanding her for the exercise. He wasn't correcting her for breaking the timeline, or clearing a structure too aggressively, or pushing a scenario past what the class was designed for. He was provoking her, testing her, waiting for the crack, and she would not give it to him. Brennan stopped 3 feet in front of her, the distance between them shrinking into something suffocating. "You nearly injured 2 role players. You exited through a second-story window against protocol. You went off script. Again." A muscle twitched in Tor's jaw. Kane folded his arms. A few students who'd struggled through the morning's drill exchanged looks, the kind that said, yeah, she messed up. But they didn't know. They couldn't know. Not yet. Because Sarah wasn't fighting for the scenario, or for validation. She was fighting a ghost. A memory she kept hidden beneath discipline and silence. A man bleeding out in her arms, whispering words she never heard. She swallowed once, controlled the tremor in her breathing, and kept her hands at parade rest. No emotional tells, no visible reaction. Madden's voice lived in her memory like a shadow. Emotion telegraphs intention. Control the emotion, control the outcome. Brennan stepped closer, too close, his breath hot with coffee and aggression. "What do you have to say for yourself, Lieutenant?" Her voice came quiet level, the same tone she used when disarming explosives or telling a frightened local child that everything would be okay, even when it wouldn't be. "I accomplished the mission, Master Chief." A ripple moved through the crowd, murmurs, some impressed, some dismissive, all waiting for Brennan's explosion. He obliged. "You think mission success gives you the right to ignore orders," he barked, stepping even closer. "You think you get special rules because you're standing in front of an audience, or because someone up the chain likes your resume." Sarah kept her gaze level, focused, but her heartbeat that was harder to control. It wasn't fear, not of him. It was memory. The smell of dust and cordite in a Kabul safe house. Sullivan's voice, warm, laughing, humming country tunes off-key. The weight of his hand on her shoulder after their 7th mission. The look in his eyes right before everything went wrong. She pushed that memory down, steadying the breath in her lungs. "Master Chief," she said softly, "you're standing too close." Gasps whispered through the formation. Brennan's lips curled into a slow, predatory smile. "Am I?" His hand rose. 2 fingers extended, reaching for her shoulder. That tiny contact point, a mere brush of skin over uniform fabric, wasn't an attack. But it was a choice. a choice she didn't get to control. And her body, trained by 6 months in a sealed warehouse under the watch of a man who'd spent decades teaching the CIA how to kill quietly, reacted before she consciously understood what was happening. She moved like a shadow returning to its source. Her left hand snapped up, trapping Brennan's wrist against her shoulder with surgical precision. Her body rotated under his arm, hips dropping, weight shifting. Madden had taught her that movement before he taught her first strike. Her right hand found Brennan's elbow. Applied pressure. Calculated torque. Geometry, not anger. Physics, not emotion. And then, a single sickening crack. The sound cut through the courtyard like a rifle round. Brennan's body dropped, his knees slamming into sand that suddenly felt as unforgiving as concrete. His scream tore through the air, raw and shocked and violent. Every SEAL froze. Every instructor stopped breathing. And Sarah stepped back exactly 1 foot, returning to the same still posture she'd started in, controlled, centered, steady. For 2 seconds the base was silent. Then the courtyard erupted. What the hell? Jesus Christ. She broke his arm. He touched her first, did you see that? Instructor down. Voices collided in a storm of disbelief. Tor's lunged toward her, anger overriding judgment. But Sarah's body answered the threat before her mind recognized his face. She pivoted, trapped his wrist, redirected his momentum, and put him in the sand with a controlled takedown that avoided damaging anything permanent. 4 seconds, 2 senior instructors neutralized. She stepped back again, breath steady, eyes sharp, a predator forced into a corner she hadn't chosen. Captain Morrison's voice sliced through the chaos like steel. Stand, DOWN. Silence returned, shaken, fractured, different. The medic rushed Brennan. Instructors gathered but kept distance now, as if unsure what she was capable of or what else she might do. 300 SEALs stared at her, the way men looked at storms forming on the horizon. Dangerous. Uncontrolled. But not because she'd acted out of anger. Because she hadn't. Morrison approached her slowly, carefully, as if she were a piece of ordnance that might still detonate. She met his eyes, finally letting herself breathe a little deeper, not relief, not regret. Something else. Something heavier. Something she carried from Kabul to Coronado. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. My office now. She nodded once. As she walked through the parted sea of SEALs, she heard something that froze her steps for the briefest moment. A whisper. Soft, awed, terrified. Who the hell is she? She didn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. She was the operator who survived impossible rooms. The woman who held a dying man and couldn't save him. The student of a ghost from a forgotten war. The woman who broke an arm today, but had broken far worse inside herself years before. And somewhere, buried deep beneath discipline and silence, lived the truth she hadn't told anyone at Coronado. There was something she hadn't revealed yet. Something none of them were prepared to learn. Not until they forced her hand. She kept walking. But she knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Why did Morrison look at her like he already knew part of the truth, but not all of it? That question followed Sarah down the empty hallway of Building 164 as the chaos outside slowly faded behind her. The sand still clung to her boots. Her breathing still felt too controlled, like her lungs weren't sure if they had permission to relax yet. Inside Morrison's office, the blinds were half drawn, casting a pattern of sharp shadows across the desk, across her uniform, across the truth she'd buried under 2 years of silence. He shut the door with a soft click. No shouting, no accusations, no threats. Just a long, heavy exhale as he leaned against the desk and studied her, really studied her, as if trying to understand how a 57 lieutenant had just dismantled two of the most respected instructors on the base with zero hesitation and absolute control. "Sit," he said quietly. Sarah remained standing. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. She felt still. Too still. Morrison rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Lieutenant Kincaid, I've been in this command for 26 years. I've seen operators snap under stress. I've seen anger, panic, ego. I didn't see any of that today." She didn't respond. He walked around her slowly, the way Brennan had walked earlier, but Morrison's pace held no intimidation. It held calculation. "What I saw," he continued, "was someone trained to end a threat in under 3 seconds without escalating beyond necessity." His voice lowered. "That's not Navy combatives." Sarah's jaw tightened. He stopped in front of her, not close, not threatening. "Just waiting." "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "where did you learn that?" For a moment, just one, she almost told him. "The warehouse at Fort Bragg." The man with silver hair and cold eyes who moved like a ghost. The pressure plate in Kabul that still haunted her sleep. Sullivan's voice, fatting under the weight of his own blood. The promise she'd made at his grave. But she swallowed it all. Silence was safer. So she said nothing. Morrison watched her for a long, heavy beat. "Fine," he said finally. "You don't want to talk, I won't force you." He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file that looked too thin to matter. But the moment he set it on the table, Sarah's breath caught. Because she recognized the color. The seal. The classification strip. Red. Top secret / sensitive compartmented information. A file she had prayed no one on this base would ever see. Morrison slid it toward her. "I requested your background check from Washington this morning," he said. "Figured I'd get some clarity on who I was dealing with." Sarah didn't touch the file. Didn't breathe. "Most of it's redacted," Morrison tapped the cover, "but what wasn't raises questions." He flipped it open. 6 months unaccounted for after COMSCGRU. 8 months of liaison training with 0 instructors listed. A transfer to a joint task element in Kabul. 18 months of overseas duty with no operational logs except movement orders. And a commendation I've only seen awarded to operators who vanish after receiving it. He looked up. "Lieutenant, I've been in this work long enough to know what that means." Sarah swallowed. "You were Navy intelligence," he said quietly. "You were something else." Still, she didn't speak. Because the moment she acknowledged anything, even one detail, one mission, one whispered memory, it would no longer be her burden alone, and she wasn't ready for anyone else to carry any piece of what she'd lived. Morrison leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "What happened out there with Brennan wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke. You broke his arm with a technique this command doesn't teach." He lowered his voice. "And frankly, doesn't have the vocabulary to understand." He sat back. "Which means I need answers. Because this command can't operate on rumors and whispers. Not when 300 SEALs just saw something they're going to talk about for the next 10 years. Sarah finally spoke. "What do you want me to say, sir?" "Something true." But truth was a rare currency for people like her. And she'd been bankrupt the day Sullivan died. She drew in a slow breath. "Master Chief Brennan initiated contact. I responded defensively." "That's the official line," Morrison said. "And it's true, but that's not what I'm asking." He wasn't angry. He wasn't confrontational. He was something worse. He was understanding. And understanding was dangerous. "Who trained you?" he asked quietly. Her chest constricted, a tightness she hadn't felt in 2 years. Madden's shadow loomed across her thoughts like he always did whenever the truth clawed at the edges of her composure. She forced her voice steady. "I can't answer that, sir. Because you're forbidden to, or because you will." She stared at the blinds, the dust catching sunlight, the edge of the desk, anywhere except his eyes. "It's classified," she finally said. Morrison nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. Then he gently closed the file. "All right, if it's classified, it's classified." He stood up. "But someone is coming who can speak to it." Her breath stalled. "Who?" she asked, even though she already felt the answer rising like a pulse she couldn't stop. Morrison looked at her with a strangely soft expression. "Colonel Frank Madden." Her heart stopped. Just for a second. "He'll be on base tomorrow," Morrison added. "He asked that you be present." Sarah didn't feel the floor under her feet anymore. Madden. Here. Coming for her. The man who had built her. And broken her. And rebuilt her again in a way no one else ever could. Why? Why now? Why after all this time? She felt something in her chest tighten to the point of pain. And Morrison saw it. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "you're not in trouble, but I need you to prepare yourself. Whatever you've been carrying, it's about to come into the open, and I'm not sure you'll be able to put it back once it's out." Sarah nodded once. Then she walked out of the office with a stiffness that felt unfamiliar, like her body suddenly weighed twice as much. Outside, the wind coming off the Pacific hit her face like cold steel. She'd faced ambushes, explosions, betrayal, death. She survived rooms too small to breathe in. She lived through missions built on silence and ghosts. She'd held a dying man whose blood soaked into her uniform so deeply she could still feel the weight of it sometimes. But nothing, felt as terrifying as the thought of Colonel Madden walking onto this base and looking at her again. Not because he scared her, but because he knew her. Too well. Better than anyone alive. As she walked toward her BOQ quarters, whispers trailed behind her from the SEALs lining the walkway. "That's her. She's the one who dropped Brennan." "What did you see? Was it like they said?" "No, it was faster." She kept walking. Head high. Face still. Heart anything but. When she finally reached her room, she closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood, letting herself breathe. Just once, just for a second. A memory rose unbidden. Madden's voice echoing in a warehouse that smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and unspoken truths. "Control is everything, Lieutenant, but one day, the thing inside you that you keep locked down, someone going to force it open. And when they do, you won't get to choose who sees it." She squeezed her eyes shut. That day was tomorrow. And she wasn't ready. Not for the watching eyes. Not for the judgment. Not for the truth that had teeth and never stopped biting. And especially not for seeing Madden again, with Sullivan's ghost still haunting her every breath. Why did she wake before dawn, long before her alarm, long before the base stirred, heart pounding as if something was already coming for her? The sky outside her BOQ window was still black, the faintest hint of gray on the horizon. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of early PT formations and the soft rustle of ocean wind. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her mind had spent the night dragging her back to Kabul, back to the safe house, back to Sullivan's lifeless weight in her arms, back to Madden's voice telling her to let go when she couldn't. And now he was coming here. After 2 years. After all the silence. After everything she'd tried to bury. Sarah sat up slowly, rubbing a hand across her face. The room felt colder than it should have, like the air itself was reacting to something inside her. She stood, pulled on her running shoes, tied her hair back, and slipped out into the early morning without looking back. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed space. But you can't outrun memory, especially not one that still bleeds if you press too hard on it. The beach was empty when she reached it. The first pale streaks of dawn painted the water silver. She jogged along the shoreline, boots sinking into wet sand, the ocean hissing with every wave. Her breath came steady, rhythmic, controlled. Always controlled. But inside, nothing felt steady. The more her feet moved, the more her mind drifted. Back to the moment Sullivan fell. Back to the moment the world went quiet except for her own heartbeat, and the echo of a gunshot she could still feel in her bones. Back to Madden grabbing her shoulders, forcing her to look at him, forcing her to breathe. You did everything you could. She hadn't. He made his choice. She didn't believe it. You need to let go. She couldn't. Sarah stopped running. Hands braced on her knees. Breath breaking, not out of exhaustion, but from something tightening inside her chest. She closed her eyes, fighting a tremor in her hands. Why now? Why was Madden coming now? Why did Morrison call him? Why did the past refuse to stay where she'd left it? A voice interrupted her thoughts. You're out early. Sarah straightened immediately. Commander Avery Kane approached from the rock line, hands tucked behind his back, expression unreadable. He wasn't someone she spoke to often, mostly because he rarely spoke to anyone without a uniform reason. But today, he walked toward her like he'd been looking for her. Couldn't sleep, she said, calmer than she felt. Kane nodded once, his gaze on the horizon. I heard Morrison called in a specialist. Her stomach sank. He knew. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. Just someone from my past, she answered softly. That's an interesting choice of words for Colonel Frank Madden, Kane replied. She stiffened. So he knew more than she'd hoped. Word travels, he added, especially when a man with his reputation steps foot on our base. Sarah didn't reply, because she didn't know what to say. What could she say? That Madden was the one who taught her how to control fear, that he'd spent months tearing her down and rebuilding her into something she didn't fully understand, that he'd held together the pieces of her after Sullivan died. She looked away. Kane studied her. Lieutenant, whatever happened before you got here, it's following you. She felt her jaw clench. I know. And if you don't deal with it, he continued, it will swallow you whole. Sarah didn't want to hear that, not from him, not from anyone. She started to walk past him, but he reached out gently, stopping her with a hand on her arm. Not forceful. Not aggressive. Just human. She froze, not because he touched her, but because part of her flinched internally, the way anyone who's lived through trauma instinctively recoils from unexpected contact. Kane noticed. I'm not Brennan, he said softly. I'm not here to push you. She nodded and he let go. I don't know what happened to you, Kane said, but people who operate the way you do, who move the way you did yesterday, don't get that good through normal channels. Sarah didn't answer. He sighed, just be careful today. Then he walked away, his boots leaving clean lines in the sand. She watched him go. Be careful. The words echoed through her mind, long after he disappeared from view. Because today wasn't just about answering questions. Today was about facing the man who shaped her. The man who saved her. The man who broke her open when grief turned her into stone. The man who knew the truth she'd never spoken aloud, not to any commander, any file, or any therapist who tried to peel her apart. She turned back toward the base, heart heavy. By 900, the command's atmosphere had changed. There was a tension in the air, subtle, unspoken, but visible in the way people stood straighter, the way officers moved faster, the way instructors whispered to each other near the armory. Madden's arrival was no secret. Sarah walked toward the admin building, her stomach tight with something she refused to name. As she approached the door to Morrison's office, she heard voices on the other side, one familiar, deep, edged with steel she hadn't heard in years. Her breath caught. Madden. She opened the door. He stood there, hands behind his back, graying hair cut short, posture straight as a rifle barrel. Time had carved lines into his face, but his eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, cold, knowing. They landed on her instantly. For a second, just a heartbeat, something flickered behind them. Recognition, memory, pain, she couldn't tell. "Lieutenant," he said. Her throat tightened. "Sir." But he didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't move closer. He studied her like a craftsman inspecting something he'd built, evaluating stress points, old fractures, the way metal bends under pressure. 2 years, he said, voice low, and this is where you ended up. She didn't respond. Morrison cleared his throat. Colonel Madden is here as a liaison to evaluate an incident and to provide context on Lieutenant Kincaid's background. Madden didn't take his eyes off her. Her background, he repeated softly, is not something you can evaluate with paperwork. Sarah's pulse quickened. Morrison gestured to the chairs. "Let's sit." But Madden remained standing. So did Sarah. The air felt tight, like the space between them held every unspoken word of the last 2 years. Finally, Madden broke the silence. "You broke a Master Chief's arm," he said, "in front of nearly 300 SEALs." Sarah swallowed. "He initiated contact." "Of course he did," Madden replied. "And of course you responded. That's who you are." Morrison folded his arms. "Colonel, we need to determine if she poses a risk to students or staff." Madden's eyes hardened. "She's the safest person on this base." The conviction in his voice startled even Morrison. Madden stepped closer to Sarah, not close enough to intimidate, but close enough that she felt the weight of his presence again. The same weight he carried in that warehouse. The same weight he carried the night Sullivan died. "You didn't lose control yesterday," he said quietly. "You followed your training, you protected yourself." Sarah felt something twist in her chest. Old guilt, old fear, old shadows. "But," Madden continued, "you are carrying something that will eventually break you if you don't face it." Her throat tightened. "Sir." "Don't," he said, softer now, "not with me." Her breath faltered. Morrison looked between them, confused. "Colonel, what exactly did you train her for?" Madden didn't look away from her. "Survival," he said, "the kind most people never come back from." Morrison frowned. "And the techniques she used?" Madden let out a long, quiet exhale, almost like it pained him to answer. "They were designed," he said, "for operators who work alone with no backup and no guarantee anyone will recover their bodies." Silence fell, heavy, suffocating, final. Morrison's face shifted with dawning understanding. Sarah felt her heart race, the first real loss of control she'd allowed in years. Then Madden spoke again. His voice low, quiet, devastating. "But what I taught her came with a cost, and she has been paying it alone for far too long." She closed her eyes, because she knew exactly what he meant. And she knew the moment was coming. The moment she feared most. The moment when she could no longer hide Sullivan's ghost from this room. Why did Madden look at her with that expression? The one that said the truth she feared was standing just inches behind her, waiting to be acknowledged. Sarah kept her eyes on the floor, on the line where sunlight met shadow. That thin border felt safer than looking at the man who knew her better than anyone alive. Morrison leaned back slowly in his chair, sensing the weight shifting in the room. "Lieutenant," he said cautiously, "if there's something we need to understand." "There is," Madden interjected. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried more force than most men could manage even at a shout. He stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she felt the old gravitational pull she'd spent 2 years avoiding. Sarah forced a breath. This wasn't a mission. This wasn't a safe house. This was Kabul. But the ghosts came anyway. Morrison watched them like someone trying to understand a language he'd never heard spoken aloud. Madden's tone softened just barely. "Tell him," he said, "or I will." Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. Her greatest fear wasn't punishment. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't being seen as dangerous. It was being understood. Because once someone understands you deeply enough, they can hurt you without even lifting a hand. She swallowed hard, the memories gathering like storm clouds behind her eyes. "Morrison," she began quietly, "there was a mission, classified, unofficial, a liaison assignment that didn't exist on paper." He didn't blink, he didn't interrupt. Madden nodded once, gently urging. Sarah forced the next words out slowly. 6 months of training, not Navy, not Joint Command, something off the grid. Morrison frowned. "Off the grid how?" Sarah exhaled shakily. "There's a program designed for operators who go into places without support, without extraction routes, places we deny ever sending anyone." Morrison's brows drew together. "You're talking about SAD SOG-level black ops." Madden answered instead, darker. Sarah winced internally. He always knew how to cut straight to bone. Madden stepped forward, crossing his arms as he finally looked Morrison in the eye. "Lieutenant Kincaid was selected at 26 for a trial initiative under my oversight, a prototype training pipeline evaluating psychological resilience under extreme isolation." Sarah closed her eyes. "Translation," she said quietly. "They wanted to see who could operate alone for long periods without losing themselves." "And she passed," Madden said. Sarah opened her eyes sharply. "Passed," she whispered. "Colonel, I survived it. That's not the same thing." Madden didn't argue. He didn't have to. Surviving had always been her curse. Morrison let out a slow, uneasy breath. "Okay, then what happened on deployment?" The question pulled something dark and sharp inside her. She felt the room shrink, the air thicken, the walls close in like the safe house in Kabul. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, nails digging into palm. Madden caught the shift. "Don't go back there alone," he warned softly. Sarah forced herself to breathe. In, out, in. But the memory rose anyway, silent, unstoppable. "There were 4 of us," she began. "One was Sullivan." The name changed the air. Even Morrison noticed. Sarah's voice softened. "He was the heart of the team. He made the job bearable, made us remember there was life outside mission parameters." Madden watched her closely. "And then," she continued, voice wavering, "we walked into a trap." Morrison leaned forward. "Taliban." "No," Madden answered again. "Someone worse." Sarah nodded. "A splinter group, ex-Black Ops paramilitary defectors. They knew our tactics, our procedures, our signals." Her throat tightened. "They knew us too well." Morrison's jaw tightened. "What happened?" Sarah stared at the floor. "There was a bomb," she whispered. "A pressure plate under loose flooring in the inner corridor. Sullivan stepped on it." The room went silent. Completely. Utterly. Silent. Madden's stare darkened. Morrison's mouth opened slightly before he caught himself. Sarah swallowed tremors that wanted to crawl up her arms. "He knew," she said, voice breaking. "He knew the moment he felt the click." She blinked, fighting tears she'd refused for 2 long years. "He told us to go." Morrison whispered, "Jesus." Sarah shook her head. "Madden, he grabbed me. He dragged me out. I fought him. I begged him. Her voice cracked hard. "I tried to go back for Sullivan." Madden's jaw tightened, not with anger, with memory. "You would have died," he said quietly. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. I left him standing there, alone. Her breath hitched. She forced it back down. Morrison's voice softened. Lieutenant, you didn't have a choice. But she shook her head. Everyone keeps saying that, but I feel it. Every night, every morning, every time I walk into a room with people who trust me. I feel that moment, him looking at me, telling me to run. And I did. I ran. Madden's voice dropped low and painful. He made his choice. You honored it. Sarah looked up sharply, eyes shining with a grief she'd spent years burying. Honored it, she whispered. He died alone in a dark room, and I'm still here pretending I deserve to breathe. How does that honor anything? Morrison didn't speak. He couldn't. Not with that kind of pain sitting raw in front of him. Madden stepped closer, his presence steady. Not overpowering, not forceful, just solid in the way a wall stands between you and a storm. Lieutenant, he said gently, look at me. She did. And for the first time in years, she didn't see the instructor or the colonel. She saw the man who dragged her out of that building. The man who held her while Sullivan's scream tore through the night. The man who stayed awake beside her for 40 hours straight after she collapsed. The man who saw her break and refused to let her stay broken. You're alive because he wanted you alive, Madden said. He trusted you to keep going when he couldn't. Sarah shook her head, tears slipping down despite her efforts. I still hear it, sir. That last sound, that. Madden stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. You don't need to carry it alone anymore. She inhaled sharply, because that was the truth she feared most. Not the mission. Not the failure. Not the death. The aloneness. The suffocating belief that grief was hers to bear in silence, in shadows, in nightmares. Morrison watched with an expression she'd never seen on him, something like compassion filtered through military discipline. Madden looked at Morrison. She doesn't need punishment. She needs space and support, and for someone in command to understand she's been operating under a psychological load no one in her pay grade should ever have to shoulder. Morrison nodded slowly. But Madden wasn't done. He turned back to her. Lieutenant, the arm you broke, the takedown, the reaction, those weren't signs of instability. Sarah blinked, confused. Those were signs of a soldier whose nervous system hasn't come down from a war she never got to leave. Her breath caught, because the words hit deeper than anything else said in that room. Madden continued, you are not dangerous, you are hurting. She swallowed, voice trembling. So what do I do now? Madden stepped back slightly, giving her space. You let us help, he said simply. You stop pretending you have to be bulletproof. You stop carrying Sullivan's ghost like it's your punishment. Her eyes burned, tears falling freely now. And you let the people who care about you stand close enough to take some of the weight. Sarah didn't move for a long time. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe. Because something inside her, the thing she'd locked away for years, had finally cracked open. Not in a violent way. Not in a dangerous way. In a necessary way. A human way. The room stayed quiet until Morrison finally spoke. Lieutenant Kincaid, you're not alone anymore. She closed her eyes. And for once, just once, she believed it. Why did the world outside feel louder now? As if every voice, every footstep, every distant command scraped against a wound she had only just admitted was real. Sarah stepped out of Morrison's office and into the morning sunlight, blinking against brightness that felt too sharp. The wind carried the faint scent of the ocean, but it didn't calm her the way it usually did. Not today. Today she felt exposed. Not because anyone on base knew the details. They didn't. They saw only fragments, rumors, whispers, glimpses of the woman who dropped 2 instructors in seconds. But Madden and Morrison, they'd seen the truth. And once truth is spoken aloud, It doesn't go back into silence. She walked across the courtyard slowly, like someone adjusting to new gravity. A group of SEAL candidates watched her pass, some with awe, others with wary curiosity. She didn't blame them. They'd seen her break Brennan's arm without hesitation. They didn't know it came from instinct, not anger. Training, not ego. Trauma, not aggression. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool air settle her heartbeat. She needed clarity, space, something to anchor her when everything inside felt suddenly loose, shifting in ways she couldn't control. Voices echoed behind her. "Lieutenant." She turned. Commander Kane approached, hands in pockets, posture relaxed, but eyes sharp. He stopped a few feet away, studying her face with a concern he didn't bother hiding. "You all right?" he asked. Sarah shrugged lightly. "Define all right." Kane huffed a quiet breath, almost a laugh but not quite. "Fair enough." He walked beside her as she resumed moving toward the training fields. After a few steps, he spoke again. "Morrison filled me in on part of what happened. Not details, just enough to explain." He gestured vaguely toward her. "This." Sarah didn't look at him. "This." "Yeah," Kane said softly. "The thing you carry in your eyes when you think no one's looking." She swallowed gently, didn't realize it was that obvious. "It isn't," Kane replied. "Not to most people, but to someone who's been there." He paused. "It's loud." They reached the edge of the field where the morning classes were forming. Kane didn't follow her down the steps. He stayed on the upper walkway, lowering his voice. "Whatever happened before today, it's not weakness, and you're not dangerous." Sarah's throat tightened. Madden said something similar. "Then he's smarter than most colonels," Kane said. She gave him a faint, tired smile. "You know, most people here look at me like I might explode." "That's because they don't understand what they saw," Kane said simply. "And what people don't understand, they fear." His expression softened. "But I saw someone surviving, not attacking." Her chest tightened in a way that scared her, because his words were kind. Too kind. And kindness can hit harder than cruelty when you're not ready for it. Before she could respond, Morrison's voice echoed across the courtyard. "Lieutenant Kincaid, briefing room in 10. Sarah straightened instinctively. Kane stepped back, nodding once. "Go," and Sarah. She paused. "You're doing better than you think." She didn't answer, couldn't. She simply nodded and walked away. The briefing room was cool and dim when she entered. Only Morrison and Madden were inside. A large screen displayed system diagrams, terrain imagery, and encrypted reports. Sarah hesitated, then took a seat beside Madden, though not too close. Morrison cleared his throat. "All right," he began. "We need to discuss next steps." Sarah stiffened. "Next steps? Meaning consequences, evaluations, restrictions, maybe even removal from the program." Morrison folded his hands. "Lieutenant, officially, your actions yesterday fall under self-defense. Multiple witness statements confirm Brennan initiated physical contact." Sarah exhaled carefully. "Good." But Morrison continued. "Your response was," he paused delicately, "above the expected capability for your rank." Madden snorted. "Understatement." Morrison shot him a look, which means higher command wants a psychological review. Sarah tensed. Of course they did. Operators like her were always one breath away from being labeled unstable. Madden leaned back. "A review makes sense." She turned sharply to him. "Sir." He cut her off gently. "Sarah, listen." Hearing her first name felt like being pulled backward in time. Back to late-night training sessions in the warehouse. Back to whispered strategies in Kabul safe houses. Back to the night Sullivan died. "You aren't being punished," Madden said. "You're being given a chance to breathe." She looked away. "Breathing feels dangerous." Morrison frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, then quietly. When something hurts long enough, you forget what normal feels like. And when someone takes the weight away, even a little, everything inside shifts. Madden nodded slowly. That shift is healing, not danger. She closed her eyes. It doesn't feel like healing. Of course it doesn't, Madden said. You've been carrying guilt like armor. When armor comes off, the skin underneath feels raw. Silence settled between them, heavy but not suffocating. Morrison cleared his throat again. Lieutenant, the review is next week. Until then, I'm removing you from full contact training. Sarah stiffened instinctively. Sir. It's not punishment, Morrison repeated. It's protection. From yourself and from people who might provoke you without understanding the consequences. Madden added, you'll stay on base. Limited rotation, no isolation, no overexertion. Sarah clenched her jaw. So I'm grounded. Yes, Morrison said, temporarily. She nodded, though frustration simmered beneath her calm expression. Being grounded felt like confinement, like a reminder that she was a problem to be managed. But then Madden spoke again. Sarah, this isn't confinement, it's rest. A bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. I don't know how to rest. Madden smiled sadly. Then it's time you learned. He stood, walking to the screen. There's one more thing. Sarah braced herself. A memorial ceremony, Madden said softly, for Sullivan. Her breath caught violently. We never gave him one, Madden continued. Not properly, not with his team, not with the people who lived because of him. Sir, she shook her head. I can't, I'm not. You are, he interrupted. You more than anyone. Her hands trembled. She clenched them into fists to hide it. Morrison spoke gently. Lieutenant, losing someone like that leaves a wound that never fully closes, but honoring him might help you breathe again. She swallowed hard. The idea terrified her. Standing in front of people, speaking his name out loud, letting the world see what he meant to her, what his death did to her. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Madden stepped closer, voice low. Then we'll stand beside you. Her eyes burned instantly. Because she believed him. And that belief hurt more than anything. Morrison nodded. The ceremony is optional, but I hope you'll consider it. Sarah stood abruptly, needing air. I need a moment. Madden nodded. Morrison didn't stop her. She left the room quickly, walking until the hallway blurred into light and shadow. Outside, she braced herself against the wall, breathing hard. The ocean wind hit her face again. This time it didn't ground her. It cracked her. Just a little. Just enough for the past to slip in. Sullivan's laugh. Sullivan's hand on her shoulder. The click beneath his boot. His final order, run. Her breath shook violently. She pressed a hand over her heart, like trying to hold it together by force. Why now? Why all at once? Why did the world suddenly feel too big, too loud, too close? A voice behind her answered the question she hadn't spoken. Because you're finally ready to feel it. She turned. Kane stood there, expression calm, gentle. Not prying. Not pushing. Just present. And for the first time, she didn't run from the vulnerability in her chest. She let it sit there. Let it hurt. Let it breathe. Kane stepped closer, voice soft. What do you need? Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. And she answered honestly for the first time in years. I need, her voice cracked. I need someone to stand with me, not behind me, not above me, with me. Kane nodded without hesitation. Then that's exactly where I'll be. Something inside her loosened, something so tight it had felt fused to her bones. For the first time since Sullivan died, she didn't feel entirely alone. Why did the world seem to hold its breath as she stood in front of the memorial table, Just a folded flag, a pair of Sullivan's dog tags, and a framed photo that felt heavier than the entire base. It wasn't a ceremony, not officially. No podium, no formation, no speeches rehearsed in advance. Just people, operators, instructors, SEAL candidates, commanders. Men and women who didn't know Sullivan, but knew what it meant to lose someone you trusted with your life. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the courtyard gold. The wind came off the ocean in soft, steady gusts. Sarah stood beside Madden and Morrison, with Kane on her other side, close enough to feel, far enough to give her space. She hadn't wanted this, but she needed it. And that truth, more than anything, terrified her. Madden spoke first, voice steady. "Sergeant Michael Sullivan, call sign Echo, friend, fighter, protector, lost in service of a mission that never made the news." Heads bowed, not out of ritual, out of understanding. Madden continued. "Some people leave this world loudly, Sullivan left quietly, but the impact he made," he glanced at Sarah, "never stopped echoing." She swallowed hard. Kane stepped forward. "We're here today because Lieutenant Kincaid carried this loss alone for a long time. Too long. Today, we share the weight." Sarah's breath trembled. This was it. Her turn. Her voice. Her truth. She stepped toward the table, her boots sinking softly into the sand. For a moment, she just stared at Sullivan's photo. The same lopsided grin. The same spark in his eyes. The same joy he carried like a weapon against the world's darkness. Her throat burned. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence breathe. Let the moment settle. Let her heart steady. And then quietly, shakily, she began. "I never knew how to say goodbye to him." A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but real. People shifted, people listened. Sarah continued. "He was the kind of person who made you feel safe even when everything around you was falling apart. The last person you think you'll lose. The last person who deserved to go the way he did." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "He saved my life, not because it was his job, not because it was protocol, but because that's who he was. Someone who walked into hell and still found a way to make you laugh." Her eyes filled and she let the tears fall. "Not hidden. Not buried. Not fought back. I ran because he told me to, and for 2 years I hated myself for listening. I thought leaving him behind made me weak, made me a coward." She looked at Madden. His eyes said no, they always had. "But I understand something now," Sarah whispered. "He didn't die so I could feel guilty for the rest of my life. He died because he believed my life was worth saving. And I dishonor him every time I pretend his choice was a burden instead of a gift." The wind swept through the courtyard in a gentle hush. She wiped one cheek briefly, kept going. "I'm done carrying this alone. I'm done pretending I can shoulder everything without breaking. I'm done hiding parts of myself because I think they make me weak." Her voice steadied. "Sullivan taught me how to live. Madden taught me how to survive. And the people on this base, somehow, you've shown me how to stay." Her eyes softened at Kane for a fraction of a second. Not romance, not attachment. Recognition. Connection. Humanity. She turned back to the memorial table. Her final words came out soft, but strong in a way that didn't need volume. "I miss you, Sully. I always will. But I'm ready to stop drowning in the moment you left and start living in the life you saved." She touched the frame one last time. A tear fell onto the glass. She let it. Then she stepped back. And the courtyard, silent, respectful, understanding, exhaled as one. Madden placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. "He'd be proud of you." She didn't flinch. For the first time, she accepted the touch. Morrison nodded once, a small gesture of deep respect. "You did good, Lieutenant." Kane stepped closer, speaking softly so only she could hear. "You didn't face the storm alone this time." Her chest warmed, not painfully but gently, like breathing after being underwater too long. The ceremony dissolved slowly. People walked up leaving small tokens, challenge coins, patches, handwritten notes. None of them knew Sullivan, but they knew loss, and they knew her, and that was enough. When the crowd finally dispersed, she stood alone with the memorial for a few moments, letting the ocean wind wrap around her like a quiet embrace. Madden approached last. "You did what you needed to do," he said, "and I'm proud of you more than you know." She looked at him, really seeing him. The man who trained her. The man who carried her through the worst night of her life. The man who showed up again when everything threatened to break. "I'm sorry I disappeared after Kabul," she murmured. Madden shook his head. "You weren't disappearing. You were surviving the only way you knew how." A long pause. "Don't vanish again," he said, softer this time. "Not like that." She nodded. "I won't." He shook her hand. "My part in this is done. Yours is just beginning." Then he left, his silhouette cutting across the sand until the wind swallowed him. Kane stayed behind. They stood side by side, watching the ocean crash against the break wall. For minutes, neither spoke. The waves carried the silence easily. Finally, Sarah exhaled. "I thought remembering him would break me." Kane shook his head gently. "Remembering someone doesn't break you. Forgetting yourself does." She glanced at him. "Do you think this gets easier?" she asked. "No," Kane said honestly. "But you get stronger, and not the kind of strength they teach in training rooms, the kind that comes from letting people in." Sarah looked back at the ocean. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't feel so far away. It felt reachable, possible, real. She stood a little straighter, breathed a little deeper, let the world in instead of holding it out. A quiet truth settled in her chest, soft, steady, unshakable. Sullivan was gone, but she wasn't lost. She wasn't drowning. She wasn't alone. And tomorrow, she wouldn't wake with guilt as her first breath. Not anymore. The final thought came to her naturally, like something she'd always known but never spoken aloud. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And today, finally, she had acted. Not out of instinct, not out of training, not out of fear, but out of healing. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah Kincaid felt alive.